Hi, faithful caretaker. Today we're going to be talking about attitudes, but first, I want to say thank you. Just in case no one has said thank you for what you're doing in taking care of your loved one recently, I want you to know that there is a gal in the state of North Carolina that appreciates all that you are doing, and I understand how difficult it is. I took care of my mom when she had dementia, so I understand there are good days and bad days, but I also want you to understand that you can do this. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's talk about attitudes. When I started taking care of mom, it was a quick realization that the world she lived in was not the world that I lived in. Her reality and my reality were two totally different things. And you can't train them out of that world. It's like looking at an onion. And you know how an onion has layers. Reverse care is taking care of them living life backwards. You peel that first layer off of that onion, and they might not be living in 2023, which it is right now when I'm filming this. They might be living in 2018 or 2015, and you peel off another layer. And then they're living in 2019 again, and then back to 2023. And that's what it's going to do. At first, it's going to be back and forth. But then all of a sudden, those layers are just going to keep on going backwards. And then you're going to find yourself dealing with someone who's living in the 1920s or the 1930s. That's what it was like when my mom first looked at me and said, "Well, you're my little sister." And I realized that's just the world she lived in. And I had not lived in that world. But because I had built a relationship with my mom before she had dementia and, through all my growing up years and knowing her all this time, I'd ask questions. So I understood what she meant when she said, "You're my little sister." I knew what her little sister looked like, and I could relate to her in her world. But I could not expect her to come out of her world back into my world. And when you keep that in mind, it just helps when you're caring for a loved one that this reverse care is done out of love for someone that does not even understand who you are. And that alone should give you compassion. But then the second thing that I remember and tried to remember as I was caring for mom was the term dementia. The first time that the doctor said to you and your loved one, "You have dementia," I know you felt scared. And if you felt scared, can you imagine how that loved one felt? They were probably terrified because they knew what was getting ready to happen. So that's a second thing to keep in your mind when you're taking care of them. And the third thing that I remembered and that I learned very quickly was that my attitude, my personal attitude, was more important than my mom's attitude. Your loved one's attitude is going to be a lot dependent on how you react to what they are doing, to what they are saying. So keep that in mind. If you keep a good attitude, it's going to make your day go smoother. It's not always going to be easy, and I understand that. When they make a mess, it's really easy to get upset. But if you would look at them as if they were a guest in your home, how would you react to a guest in your home that did something without realizing what they were doing? You wouldn't lash out at them and you wouldn't be upset. So treat your parent with the same love and dignity and respect that you would treat a guest that was in your home. Because if you can keep your stress level down, then it's going to keep their stress level down, and that's going to be good for you, for your health, and for the whole atmosphere in the home. That's just the benefit of a positive environment is extremely important, just extremely important. And so how do you keep your attitude right? Some of the things that I did personally was I kept my sense of humor. God did bless me with a sense of humor, and it would have been easy to lose that sense of humor during care for mom sometimes because it was difficult cleaning up and doing some of the things that I had to do in taking care of her. But I just kept my sense of humor. For example, I was taking a shower one day and I thought mom was sufficiently occupied that I could do that. And it's like when you have a little baby, remember getting ready in 20 minutes or 15 or as quickly as you could. And that's what you do when you're taking care of your loved one. So I thought that she was sufficiently occupied, and I heard the back door open. We had an alarm on the back door and it said back door open, and I went, "Oh my word. Mom has opened the back door." Because I had moved in with her to take care of her 24/7. So I was just like almost panicked, and I'm yelling her, I'm going, "Mom, Mom." And of course, she's not listening to me. So I'm grabbing a towel and a robe and running to the back door. By the time I get there, Mom is not in sight. And it was cold. It was freezing cold out. So then I ran to the front window to see if she had gotten out that way, walking down the road or whatever, and she wasn't there. So I went back to the back door. By then I had gotten some shoes and I was getting ready to go out the back door, and I looked out the door and there she came walking down the side of the house, and I'm like, "Hey Mom, what you doing?" And I said, "Why don't you come in? It's kind of cold out there." And she was frustrated. She said, "Well, don't you think I'm trying to?" And I got her back inside, and I had to laugh about it. Not in front of her because she was upset, but when I got away from her, I had to laugh about it because the spectacle I'm sure that I was and what mom was and what the conversation was, if you don't laugh over times like that, you're going to get really frustrated. And you know what happens when you get frustrated? You get bitter and you get angry. And then you do things that you really wish you had not done. So I implore you to keep your sense of humor. And then another thing, the second thing I did to keep a good spirit was to not give long, drawn out answers to the endless questions that you will get. That helps because if you give a long, drawn out answer 20 times to the same question, you're going to, number one, wear yourself out. And number two, they're not remembering. And so they're just going to ask you that same question again. So don't wear yourself out in the process. Just give a short answer, not short as in intonation, short as in a concise little answer for them, and then just keep going. And we'll talk later in another video about things you can do to detract them and kind of guide them maybe in a different way. And remember, all these are just suggestions of things that worked for me. They might not work for you today, but they might work for you tomorrow. So just kind of keep all these conversations in your storehouse of knowledge that you're gathering as you're taking care of your loved one and as you're listening to people talk and as you're reading and learning. These are things that might not work today, but they might work tomorrow. And then the third thing that I did to keep a good spirit was to be respectful to mom. And let me give you an example of how I was not respectful to mom as something not to do. This was in the very early stages, and my mom was not a aggressive person. She had a very good high spirit, but she was very quiet in spirit and meek in spirit. But that didn't mean she was a walked on mat or anything. But that being said, mom had never had to apologize to me in her whole life because she was mindful of her words. She was careful. She had, disciplined herself not to react to people, to have knee-jerk reactions like a lot of people tend to do. So I was very respectful of mom anyway. But one day, again, this was like in the early stages where she might be very coherent and in my world 1 minute, and then 10 minutes later she was not. So I remember her standing across the room from me and looking at me and just saying, "I want to go to Piedmont to see your dad." Well, Piedmont Bible College was a college my dad had gone to decades ago. Dad had already passed away, and I knew, okay, this is what dementia is starting to really look like. And I said, "Well, Mom, Dad's not at Piedmont." And she got really frustrated. And she said, "Well, how do you know he's not?" And I said, "Well, Mom, that time of life is over. And there's not anyone there that we know at Piedmont anymore. So there's no reason to go to Piedmont." And she got upset. And she spoke some words to me, not bad words, but she was just very upset and frustrated at me. And it was very apparent. So finally, I looked at her and I said, "Mom, what do you want me to do? I have done everything that I know to do to help you. What do you want me to do?" And I said it in that frustrated tone. I don't think I had ever used that tone with a voice with my mom before, ever. And she just looked at me and she just sat down on the couch. And I thought, okay, remove yourself from this situation. So I did. I walked up the hall and walked to my bedroom. And 45 minutes later, maybe even an hour, I heard Mom coming up the hall. And I went to my bedroom door and she stood there looking at me and she said, "I just want to apologize for how I acted a while ago." And I will tell you, even telling that story is a little difficult for me because I had, number one, raised my voice to my mom. But number two, I was looking at a woman who had controlled herself so much her whole life and never was hateful. And all of a sudden, here she was having to stand there and apologize to me. And it just broke my heart because I knew that that woman was not the woman and the mother that I knew growing up. And I looked at her and I said, "Mom, it's okay." I said, "We are just both frustrated. It's okay." So I tell you that story to say there are moments that you might get frustrated, but if you can learn to control that, it will keep your loved one from feeling hurt. Because she was hurt not just that I wouldn't take her to Piedmont to see Dad, but also that I had spoke and raised my voice to her in a way that was not right. Frankly, that was not right. And I learned, like, immediately, I learned that lesson. It was like, you do not talk like that to your mother again, ever, is what I'm saying in my head to myself. So just be kind and be respectful and love them for who they are right now because they have no control over this disease. So what I learned, the last two things I learned was taking care of my mom made me understand that it was not about me whatsoever anymore. It was not about me. This is when Miriam could not be selfish. This is what I call inconvenient love. And I'll do a whole video on the difference between inconvenient love and unconditional love later. But this was inconvenient love. But this is what was required of me. And it was okay because this was my mother and I respected her. But it was hard and it was not about me. This life was not about me anymore. This season of life, I had to remove myself from probably 80 to 85% of the life that I normally lived because I was taking care of Mom. And that was okay. I came to that realization very quickly also that it was okay. It didn't mean it wasn't hard, but it did mean that I learned to be content, as the Word of God says, to be content in whatsoever state that you're in. And sometimes it's difficult. It doesn't mean that I was not human and that I did not get frustrated at times, but it meant that I could be content taking care of Mom because that was my job to do that. Not just my duty and not just my job, though. It was because I loved her. And it was my duty to make my mom feel loved, to make her feel safe, and make her feel secure, and make her know that if I was around her, everything was going to be done for her as well as could possibly be done. That was my job then. That's what it became. And I also, let me just throw this out here. My brother was a pastor, and he unexpectedly went to live in heaven 4 years ago, but he lived in Wisconsin. I lived in the state of North Carolina. And I had another brother that was at the time a bachelor. So he was still here in the home with us. But my brother in Canada, who was a pastor, talked to me one day when I was just crying and I was upset because I was tired. I was exhausted. And he said, "Just tell me what you want me to do." And I said, "I don't know." I said, "I have no idea what I even need to do at this point." And he said, "Well, if you would just remember that what you're doing in caring for our mother it's not forever." And the "it's not forever" rang in my ears the rest of the time that I took care of my mother, because I knew it was not forever. One, that rang in my ears. The second thing that I kept in my thought process, that the Lord just brought it to my mind a lot, was a conversation I'd had with my mom decades ago when I was talking about her relationship with Dad, because before Dad passed away, they'd been married 56 years. And I asked her about that. How did you make that work? Because growing up, honestly, when my brother preached at my dad's funeral, he said, we never heard our parents argue growing up. And that was the truth. We never heard them argue. We knew that they had disagreements, but they never argued and yelled and screamed at each other. They were just very respectful of each other. So when I was asking Mom about that, I said, how did you keep it under control, basically? And she said, she said, I knew that one day I would probably be looking at his head on a satin pillow. And she said, I wanted no regrets. And that's hard for me to say without breaking down, even this many years past the time that my dad's passed and my mom's passed away. But keep that in mind too. And I don't want that to be a morbid thought, but you keep in mind that they can't live in the world that you live in anymore. And it's your job to take care of them and make sure they're safe and secure and loved and well taken care of as you possibly can. And keep in mind that someday you'll see their head on a satin pillow and you don't want any regrets. I've heard many children that had regrets. And from my mom, when she was a young lady, from the time she married my dad till the time she buried my dad, she was respectful. She kept the peace, and she was respectful of him, knowing that someday he'd be gone. And she didn't want to live with regrets. And I thought, that's just a good way to live our life, isn't it? So anyway, I hope some of these thoughts help you, and I hope that it's an encouragement to you to know that it's not forever and that you can do this. It might be hard, but you can do this. And we're going to talk about a multitude of different ways to help you along the way in coming videos. And I just appreciate you tuning in and listening to what I have to say. I'm a grandma now myself, so I feel like this is the time that the Lord's laid on my heart that I need to share some of my thoughts with the world, that if I can help just one person on this journey of reverse care with their loved one, then I'm going to feel like I have done what I've needed to do. Anyway, God bless y'all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll be praying for each and every one of you, and I will see you the next time around. Bye-bye.